Hello, are you able to see this?
Yes, sir, it's visible now.
Okay, fine. So I'm ready now. Whenever you're.
Yes,
I
we'll be
begin.
starting in a few minutes. I'll
Yeah,
inform
no
you.
issue. I'm ready now. If this is visible, then there's no problem. Actually, it's visible. It's okay. Mhm.
दरअसल सबका फोटो सेशन चल रहा है अभी सबको जैकेट पहना दिया
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Mhm.
honorable dignitaries, delegates, faculty members, and dear students, a very good morning to all of you. I, Dr. Iram Neha, welcome you all at the AICTE-sponsored lecture session on multi-criteria decision-making, relevance, and techniques and applications in academic context under DCP scheme organized by Galgotia's College of Engineering and Technology, Greater Noida. I welcome the expert for this session, Professor Prem Rath, former Director IIT Roorkee Uttarakhand, and Dr. Mohammad Asim Qadri, Director GCET. It's my privilege to introduce you all to our expert, Professor Prem Rath, former Director IIT Roorkee. Professor Rath has also served as Vice Chancellor, AKTU, Professor, Head, Center for Management Studies, Coordinator, Applied System Research Program, Dean, Deputy Director, and Director Officiating at IIT Delhi, Professor and Division Chairman of Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok, and also the AICTE Distinguished Chair Professor. He has extensive experience of more than 52 years in teaching, research, management, development, and consultancy. Once again, we are pleased to have you here with us today. I request our esteemed guest, Professor Prem Rath, sir, to please start with the session. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone participating in this session in virtual mode. The session that has been given to me, the title is Multi-Criteria Decision Making, Relevance in Techniques and its Applications in Academic Context. Of course, this is a fairly wide spectrum of techniques and areas. In fact, there are International Society for Multi-Criteria Decision Making, and therefore to cover many of these issues in a short single session will not be feasible. I'll try to give you an overview and some of the techniques and its potential applications in varied context. Of course, although it can be applied in academic context, but it can be applied in every context, individually, including in your own personal context. Now, as you know, that decision making is theory of choice. When you want to make a decision, you want to achieve a goal, an objective. If objective happens to be more than one, it becomes multi-criteria. And therefore, the basic structure of decision making in conventional mode, whether single criterion or multi-criterion, the basic structure is the same, whether it's an operational decision or a strategic decision. And therefore, the essence of structured approach to decision making is that you have, when you want to make a decision, you have a goal to be accomplished. You call them an objective function or criterion function or goals or objectives. There are multiple alternative options available to you which can help you achieve that goal. You call them alternatives, options, strategies, policies, or whatever. As I mentioned, that decision-making theory of choice, if you have no choice, there is no policy, no decision-making required. Therefore, in every decision-making problem, you have to first create choices, define alternatives, generate alternatives, define criteria, and then the decision science or management science or operations research techniques help you to choose the best. And therefore, structurally, whether single criterion or multi-criterion decision making, the standard format is define the goal. If there are more than one, you define the goals and the priorities amongst those goals. What are your options? These are your alternatives or feasible solutions. Which option is the best? Therefore, classically, much of the scientific approach to decision making has been to what is termed as single criterion decision making. For example, some of the fairly well-known techniques in operations research, starting from the early part of the linear programming, etc., has been single criterion decision making, where you say that you have a single well-defined measurable criterion. This could be minimize cost, maximize profit, minimize wastages, minimize distances involved, minimize transportation time, minimize wastages, and all that. So much of the decision science approaches have been focused on single criterion optimization from the early start of 1939, when linear programming as one of the very powerful technique was formulated with a view to identify optimal allocation of resources to various competing demands in the most effective manner. And since then, much of the development of scientific decision making has been on single criterion. But it has been, it is the early, in 1970s onwards, it was recognized that there are very few problems at the strategic level of decision making which are single criterion. Which means that when you solve a problem or when you want to make a decision, very rarely you will come across a strategic or policy level decision making which would involve only one criterion. And even if you make a decision based on a single criterion at a strategic level, it may not be very sensible. And that's why the role and importance of multi-criteria decision making has been more and more emphasized. And nowadays it's almost axiomatic that in any strategic level of decision making or any policy decision making, invariably the right approach would be not to treat this decision making problem against a single well-defined measurable criterion. And therefore, it seems that all problems of major significance are multi-criterion in nature. Obviously, this means that the decision spectrum can be defined into two extremes. One is single criterion optimization problem, where you have a single well-defined criterion, and the other extreme is so operational problem and strategic problem. Now let's look at what I've been using the word strategic decision. What does it mean? A strategic decision, as opposed to the operational decision, is that a decision that you make where multi-criterion becomes a more relevant technique for application, is that the decision has a long-term impact. If you make a wrong decision, you'll continue to suffer for a very long term, and therefore it becomes an important decision of major significance, because all strategic decisions have long-term impact. If you make a good decision, you'll continue to enjoy the benefits of making a good choice. If you make a wrong decision, you'll continue to suffer for all times to come till that decision is valid. That's called the time horizon. The second important attribute of a strategic decision where multi-criterion optimization becomes relevant is that the decisions you make at a strategic level affect the entire organization. It is a global scope. Almost the entire organization is impacted by the decision that you make. The third, and that's important why it becomes relevant to make multi-criterion decisions. The third is impact of error, the cost of error. If you go wrong in making a strategic choice and implement the decision, and then you realize that you made a mistake, the cost of rectifying that mistake is very, very huge. So which means that the opportunity cost of making a wrong choice in case of strategic domain is much, much more compared to the operational decisions where you can easily rectify an error. And the fourth,
Sir, I think the slides are not
yes?
moving. We are able to see the title slide only.
And I'm only making a beginning. I'm beginning with background.
All right. All right.
Therefore, I'm coming to why it's important and in which context to make your multi-criterion decision making. That's not a part of slide. I hope you're listening to me.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, that's important. I'm making a major foundation why it's important to make multi-criterion decision making in a strategic choice and what constitutes a strategic decision. And therefore, all strategic decisions ought to be made by there's not a single criterion in which you should decide. For example, when you hire a faculty, that's a strategic decision. You should not be hiring a faculty solely based on the minimum wages that he is willing to accept. So hiring a faculty on the least salary that he is willing to accept is a wrong way of hiring a faculty. Similarly, hiring a faculty exclusively on the basis of a single criterion, it could be only the academic credentials. For example, a person may be very good academically, but his communication is weak. or is not a very inspiring personality. And therefore, all important decisions have multi-criterion dimensions in it. And therefore, the point I'm trying to make before I get going to is that all important decisions of any major significance, which we call them strategic decisions, invariably require multiple decision making. Now, that's where the structure of multi-criterion decision making would be now. For example, as I mentioned, the decision making theory of choice. So you have alternatives A1, A2, A3, A4. For example, when you're hiring a faculty, these are the candidates who are available whom you are interviewing. So the number of candidates available to you for hiring are the alternatives. These are the different candidates that you are able to evaluate their performance. Or suppose you are looking for identifying the best performer, you want to give the best researcher award, or you want to find out the best teacher award. Now, these are the alternative people who have been shortlisted for the purpose. And therefore, alternatives A1, A2, A3, AM are that from amongst these alternatives, you want to pick up the best. These alternatives could be, for example, in all strategic domain choices. Suppose you want to set up a new engineering college. And one of the important strategic decisions you have to make is, where should this be located? To the alternative locations A1, A2, A3, A4, AM are the possible places where this college could be, or this university could be located. Obviously, it's not a very sensible thing to locate a college solely on the basis of the cost of land available. For example, a wrong way to go about it would be if some state government gives you free land to set up that college and you simply get swayed by that single criterion, perhaps it may not be a very good idea. And therefore, as a result, cost of land may be one of the criteria, but cannot be the sole criterion. And many times we do make this mistake that important policy decisions of long-term consequences, we get swayed by a single factor. Therefore, these alternatives are to be weighed against a number of objectives that you have. O1, O2, O3, ON are the criterion or multiple objectives that you have. And therefore, as a result, multi-criterion decision-making involves a number of criterion. And the moment you have multiple criterion, the important question that emerges, are all these criterion equally important? No. And therefore, as a result, the problem formulation of multi-criterion dimension starts with identifying the goals or objectives or criteria. These are synonyms so far as I'm concerned in decision making. Therefore, what are the criteria against which I'm making a decision? O1, O2, O3, ON are the criteria or objectives or goals. And obviously, not all goals are equally important. And therefore, it's after having identified your goals, the next important point that you need to make is what is the relative importance of one criterion over the other? Because all criteria may not be equally important. And as a result, you define the relative importance WJ. WJ is the relative importance that you assign to the jth objective out of these multi-criteria. And therefore, when you evaluate an alternative against a multiplicity of objectives, then the preferred option, the preferred choice, or the preferred course of action that you have is the one which maximizes the total expected utility. For example, if an alternative AI on jth objective ranks EIJ, let's say EIJ, the score or the efficiency score, how good is alternative I on jth objective? Obviously, how good EIJ is, to what extent it meets your jth goal. And therefore, if EIJ is the efficiency of attaining the jth goal by the alternative I, and WJ is the importance that you assign to that goal, then WJ into EIJ is the contribution of that objective towards choosing that alternative. And obviously, since I'm looking at holistically in its totality, because the basic structure of multi-criterion decision-making problem is, in totality, out of all the factors that are relevant to me, to the extent they're important, which of the options available to me is the best. That's how you put up a problem. Mathematically, it would mean that my objective function for optimization would then become maximize EI over all values of i's of sigma wj eij j from 1 to n. This is the basic structure of all the multi-criterion decision making problem which fall into the domain that I'm going to focus on, where you have a finite discrete alternatives available. See it carefully. Here, the structure of the problem is that you have few finite alternatives available to you. For example, you have 5 or 6 alternative locations where you can set up a college, or you have 5 or 6 different, brands of car that you wish to buy. You have 5 or 6 different locations where you want to buy a house. You have 5 or 6 different universities or colleges where you have got admission. All these problems are primarily multi-criterion decision making. And the alternatives over and over could be, for example, when you're choosing a college, the location of the college, the reputation of that college, the fee structure charge, the quality of faculty that it hires, the percentage placement or the value of the placement that you have. All these are the basic multiple criteria that a people or a parent or a child or a student should choose. And therefore, all these alternatives are structured this way. So the kind of focus I'm going to have in this session, as I mentioned, that the topic is too huge, and one could spend the entire semester in talking about multi-criterion optimization. But I thought of choosing this. I wonder why this topic was chosen. But since I believe people are keen to know about it, to me, it's extremely important, because almost every problem of decision making of any significance falls into the multi-criterion dimensions. Therefore, this is the basic structure I'm going to talk about. Now, the question would arise, which means that you have to formulate a problem by clearly identifying relevant criteria. Now, it's important not to use irrelevant criterion in evaluating options. If criterion which has no relevance to the success of your choice need not, therefore identify those relevant criterion, identify the relative importance that you assign to those factors, WJ. And therefore, before you formulate a problem, before you apply a technique, you need to know, how do I know the relative importance of a jth objective or jth criterion? Now, one very simple technique, in fact, to those of you who might not be interested in a greater degree of complexity in choosing this single slide should serve your purpose. This is actually is called decision matrix approach, where the matrix that you see above is called decision matrix, where you have alternatives in your rows, goals or criterion in your columns, and WJ is the importance that you assign. And therefore, if you normalize the score EIJ, now normalization is important requirement, because, for example, the units of these objectives could be different. For example, when you're evaluating, you got admission into different colleges, you want to choose where you want to go. That is a strategic decision. Objective 1 could be fees structure. This could be in rupees. Objective 2 could be quality of that college. Objective 3 could be the percentage placement. And therefore, since the measure of these criterion are in different units, something could be in rupees, something could be in acres, something could be in percentage, something could be just the rating scale like excellent to poor. How do you convert all these different measures of these criterion into a single additive measure? That's why it's some degree of normalization of the score. I'll talk about all these things when I go ahead. I'm trying to build up a background so that those of you who might not be introduced to this area are able to at least follow the lecture that I'm going to give subsequently. Therefore, basic structure of all problems of multi-criterion decision making are the one that you see in a decision matrix that you see above. But then the major issue is, how do I define, how do I measure the relative importance that I give to various criteria? Of course, it depends upon the decision maker. It depends upon your value system. For example, it depends upon your situation. Suppose you are a student seeking admission to a college, and your financial resources are severely limited. Obviously, the fee that you need to pay to that college might become an important criterion in your choice. On the other hand, if money is not a constraint, then you'd like to pick up the best possible college available, then money or the fee that the college charges may not be a very major important criterion. It could be a criterion, but not very. So the relative importance that you assign to a particular criterion depends upon your own situation, your own value system, your own constraints, and therefore is specific to the decision maker. And that's why there is no single uniform answer to pick up the best option out of the various options in a multi-criterion. The importance you assign to various goals will determine which particular alternative would emerge as the best option. But then a very simple technique, how do I determine the relative importance of these factors? Before I tell you, or more advanced techniques subsequently, this simple technique to those who may be interested in, and so far as I'm concerned, many problems would be reasonably answered if you follow the technique given in this a single in a sheet. Now, this is a paired comparison approach, and later on other techniques will be defined. Now, paired comparison approach is a very powerful way of determining relative importance of the various measures. Now, because of the limitations of the cognitive limitation of human brain, if I say out of these 10 out of these 5 objectives, which is the best option, which is the relative importance, I may not be able to give. But if I can look at one by one, pair at a time, for example, if I want to know between objective 1 and objective 2, objective to my mind is same as criterion 1 and criterion. If O1 is objective 1 and or criterion 1 and O2 is the second objective, I want to know out of these 2 objectives which is more important to you as a decision maker. So therefore, if I prepare a paired, a triangular matrix that you see in the bottom of this PPT in a yellow shade. Now, this is a paired comparison. I'm comparing, let's say there are 5 objectives, O1, O2, O3, O4, O5, 5 criteria against which you want to make a decision. You want to know their relative importance, because this relative importance WJ is going to impact your choice very substantially. And that's why clever people would give a relatively more importance to an area of that factor in which favor you want the decision to be. That's why there are no single set answer to multi-criterion decision making. It just depends upon how much importance you assign to various criterion. But in order to be rationally choosing this, this paired comparison technique can be very powerful, very simple, but very powerful. For example, what you do here, you have a triangular matrix. If there are n alternatives and n objectives, then n into n minus 1 by 2 are the total number of paired cells that you see in this matrix. Then you compare one at a time, because human mind can easily compare one at a time. For example, O1 and O2, in the first cell that you see, you just say out of objective 1 and objective 2 or criterion 1, which is more important to you as a decision maker. And if O1 is more important than O2, you write O1 first in that cell. So if I write O1 in a cell with O1, O2, I write O1 first. It means between these 2 objectives, O1 is more important to me. Then the next question you answer is how important, how much difference is of their importance? Because an alternate, a criterion may be more important, but it is much more important than the other one. So the next thing that you write in that cell, the degree of the relative importance. And for simplicity, we say only out of 3, minor difference, medium difference, and major difference. So if I know between O1 and O2, O1 is more important than O2, then I write O1 first and then followed by 3. So if there is an O1 3 in cell 1, which means that out of these 2 objectives, O1 is more important, and there's a major difference in their objectives, in their importance. If the difference is medium, you write 2. If the difference is minor, you write 1. That means you're only dividing into 3 categories. In later on in EHP, you'd see it'll be 9 categories that will be dividing. And therefore, similarly, you compare O1 with O3 then. And if suppose O3 is more important than O1, then write O3 first, and then either 1 or 2 or 3, depending upon the degree of importance. Now fill up all these metrics, then add up all the numbers that follow O1. There's a total score of O1. Follow up all the numbers that follow O2, add up, that's the total score of O2. Like that, you arrange the total score that you have obtained in a descending order, and you'd find out the relative priorities, add up the total score, and divide the individual score by the total score, they'll give a relative importance WJ. It's a very simple but very powerful technique, and therefore in many times I've been using this for nearly 40 years now, right from at the time of evaluating MTech thesis, the right of evaluating projects, the right of evaluating candidates for awards or rewards. In fact, a similar kind of a approach has been used because it's very simple to use. And however, now I'll come to a wider canvas. Now, multi-criterion decision making can be primarily, the types of problems can be grouped into two categories. I'm going to address only one of them because of it's such an area as I talked about. These two categories of problems are where there are multiple criterion with ordinal rankings and constraints with non-finite alternatives. For example, when you have resource constraints and you have goals, and there are ordinal ranking, that means it's a topmost priority goal is 1, second priority goal is 2, third priority goal. Now, ordinal ranking is a term used where the topmost priority goal is anytime more important than the second priority goal. That means, in fact, in a lexicographical sense, and therefore, whenever the problem of decision making with multiple criteria or multiple goals falls into this category, where there is a relatively ordinal ranking amongst goals, ordinal priority rankings, like top priority goal, second priority goal, third priority goal, and there are resource constraints, then the kind of problem that optimization calls for is called with non-finite alternatives. And one of the most celebrated techniques in that is known as goal programming. So goal programming technique is a very powerful multi-criterion optimization technique, but belongs to that criterion, that domain where you have ordinal priorities amongst the goals to be described. That means your topmost, any amount of second priority goal will not be adequate to overlook the top priority goal. That's called ordinal ranking. Now, because that's a field by itself and requires a fairly good prerequisite of a linear programming, because a series of lexicographically ordered linear programming problems are solved as goal programming. So I'm not touching that topic at all. What I'm addressing now, and it's far more applicable in most cases, is the kind of problem that in category B, that's what I introduced. Therefore, but just with a view to give an idea, there are a large number of multi-criterion optimization techniques where under resource constraints with ordinal rankings and cardinal importances, you need to find out with non-finite alternatives. There are the number of alternatives are not finite. As you know, in linear programming, there are indefinite number of alternative feasible solutions possible. Therefore, that group of problem is by itself a separate category altogether. I'm not addressing that here at this point in time. What I'm addressing in the subsequent talk is what I introduced my first PPT. That a finite discrete alternatives that you have, that means you have few finite choices, and there are relative importance or relative weights given to various criteria. And as I mentioned, the decision matrix and paired comparison technique that I talked about is one of the most simple, powerful, and way back I used it in 1975 itself, because multi-criterion decision making started in the early 70s only. Prior to that, we were only solving single criterion optimization problems, which are only relevant for operational decisions, like find out the shortest route, find out the best sequence of loading a machine, where you minimize total cost, maximize total profit, minimize wastages, minimize distances, traveling sales and problems. All those problems are of a relatively operational nature, but any problem of significance and long-term becomes strategic, where multi-criterion decision-making becomes important. And therefore, now I give you, after the decision matrix and paired comparison technique, which started in, I used it in mid-70s, in determining the optimal plant location. As you know, where to locate a new plant or new factory or plant location problem, which has been classically covered in industrial engineering, is a typical multi-criterion decision making, because you have 10 different criteria: the cost of land, the buildings, the resources availability, connectivity, etc., the law and order situation in that location, etc., etc. A simple decision matrix with paired comparison approach could be used for that. But over the years, after the one of the most celebrated technique in multi-criterion is known as AHP, analytic hierarchy process, AHP, which is a technique developed by Thomas Saaty. And Saaty became a celebrity in developing AHP. Is one of the most popular techniques still being used in multi-criterion decision-making research in management science, which was developed in 1980 by Thomas Saaty. And since then, a number of multi-criterion applications have been using AHP. I'll be giving the example. So there are now dozens of multi-criterion Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Are you able to hear me now? It
Hello.
seems I got muted somehow. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then let me have to, maybe my sharing got disturbed. Okay. I need to get back to these are the problems of. Let me just. Sharing. Okay, now I get back to. Just start up here. ये उड़ गया पूरे इसमें से फिर से लगाओ शेयर नहीं हो पा रहा मेरा वो इसको वो जो मेरा ये वाला चेक करना है आ रहा है कि नहीं okay tell me are you able to hear me and see this as well
Yes, sir, it's visible and audible.
All right. Now, what I'm going to these are the problems of online connectivity. Now, I've just chosen for you for this session, for the remaining part, a list of possible techniques. As I mentioned, this is a very hot area for research in management science and industrial engineering. And it's one of the most useful techniques because almost we make decisions in our personal life. Most of these decisions are multi-criterion in nature. Indeed, any decision of significance should never be made on single criterion. For example, never attend a college with minimum fees alone, or never attend a college which is nearest to your house, etc., etc. So no single criterion should be used. Therefore, in the process, because of the importance of the subject, there have been dozens of techniques that have come up. I'll discuss only some of these. Now, just to give an idea, these are about 9 or 10 multi-criterion decision category falling into the second category. That means you have finite options available with you. Suppose you want to buy a car. These are 5-6 different car options that you can buy. Your criterion like the cost, the mileage it gives you, the safety, security, the esteem value. So these techniques are very popular. Some of them are more popular than others. And I'll be talking about some of the most popular techniques here. One is called SAW, simple additive weighting. It's more like a decision matrix that I talked about. And so far as I'm concerned, this is the simplest to be used. And in my opinion, would do. I don't think particularly unless the decision is extremely critical. It's a make or a break situation, you need to go in for a more sophisticated technique. At least simple additive weighting, you're giving relative importance to various criteria and then evaluate the alternative options available to you in this. So the simplest is SAW, simple additive weighting. Second is AHP, analytic hierarchy process. Third is TOPSIS. TOPSIS is an acronym for technique of order preference by similarity to ideal solution. That means it tries to say what is a perfect solution and how closer is the option that you want to pick up closer to the ideal solution. And therefore, TOPSIS is technique of order processing by similarity to ideal solution. Then there are more. I'll be talking about these three in the process, and then ANP is analytic and network process, which is a further improvement over AHP. SWARA, stepwise assessment ratio analysis. ELECTRA, elimination and choice translating algorithm. PROMETHEE, preferential ranking organization method for enrichment of evaluation. DMETAL, decision making trial and evaluation laboratory. And VCOR is an acronym from Serbia, although the actual acronym is very difficult for me to pronounce, but its Serbian translation is multi-criterion optimization and compromise solution. Now, out of these, and there are many more, it's not an exhaustive list. As I said, that there is an International Society for Multi-Criterion Decision Making itself holding its annual conferences. And when I was in IIT Bangkok, in 1990, we had organized an international conference on multi-criterion decision making, and we had invited Thomas Sarti, who is the father of this AHP, as the keynote speaker. From US, he had come to Bangkok and added. It is a wonderful. But he became very famous for his AHP. All them very famous. I'll be talking about these three: SAW, AHP, and TOPSIS, and a bit of overview of VCOR, just to give an idea. Although, as I mentioned, that this can be applied in every context, including academic context. For example, in academic context, where to locate your college, which programs, which courses to offer, how to evaluate your faculty selections, how to promote people, how to pick up candidates for the awards, and of course in resources, what kind of buildings, what kind of infrastructure that you like to have. So I'll be taking this example. Now I'll take SAW, AHP, and TOPSIS, depending upon the time permitted. What I'll try to do, given the heterogeneity of the background of the people who are attending this session, they may not be very comfortable in going through the nitty-gritty of the details of the technique. I'll give an overview with a view to enthuse you for the purpose by giving an example, because learning through an example would be relatively easier for you to engage yourself, and that too example down to earth, which you can relate yourself. For example, which are simple examples. I'll primarily try to cover SAW, AHP, and TOPSIS, and a bit of vigor. Let me now take example. For example, simple additive weighting. This is a very important thing indeed. I think, suppose a college graduate has to make a choice of the career. A graduating college student with a double major in finance and accounting had received 3 different job offers. Now, this is the reason I've chosen this example is to give a message to the students who are obsessed with the package criterion in choosing a career. Many times our new generation is simply swayed by how much package particular employer gives you. Here the example is to demonstrate that the package that you get should never be a sole criterion of choosing a choice, a career. Choice of a career is a multi-criterion decision making, and individual strengths and weaknesses of the person must be seen in the choice of the job that you eventually, because if you take the job that you love, the best in you will come out. If you don't take a job that the best in you comes out, you'll continue to be a mediocre. Therefore, I've consciously chosen this technique to illustrate this technique so this person gets 3 jobs. Obviously, it becomes a multi-criterion because decision-making theory of choice. Since he has 3 job options available to him, and one option, let's say city A, I've chosen it from a reference book. Financial analyst, he's a graduate in business in majoring in finance and accounting. So he gets a job of a financial analyst for an investment firm in city A, an accountant for a manufacturing firm in city B, and an auditor for CPA firm in city C. These are 3 alternative jobs that he has. And this person, because of his situation, makes a choice that he finds that the financial analyst position provides the best opportunity for a long-term career advancement is best as financial analyst. But he'll prefer to live in city B, which is closer to his house, rather than going to city A or C. But he likes the management culture of a firm in city C. Obviously, it's a multi-criterion decision making. And therefore, if suppose you were to consider only the single long-term career advancement, you'll go for city A. He's only seeing the location nearest to his house, he'll go to city B. But he's only looking at the management style or management culture, he'll go for C. But then such choices should never be made on a single criterion. So how do you do? This is called SAW. Step 1, list the decision-making criterion. Find out what are the relevant criteria that are important to you. Number 2, assign a weight to each criterion. How much importance you give to each criterion. Third, rate how well each decision alternative satisfy each criterion. That means you have to develop a index, how well a particular criterion meets a particular goal or
Sir, you are not audible.
how is it that I get muted like this?
Yes,
Are
yes,
you?
you're audible now, sir.
Yeah, because it seems I get muted by someone else.
No,
Maybe-
sir, there is some internet issue, I think, because your screen is also not visible now.
Is it visible now? Hello?
Yes, sir, it's visible now.
Okay. Now, therefore, the steps involved is that out of this, if SJ is the score for decision alternative J, and if Rij is the rating for the criterion I for decision alternative J, then the total scoring model for job selection, which career option to choose, is SJ sigma Wi into Rij. Now, let me give this example. Now, suppose criterion. This is important for a message that it goes to when you choose a career, never be swayed by a single factor. Suppose this candidate wants to make a choice of the career based on multiple criterion. So he's identified 7 criteria: the possibility of career advancement, the location where this particular job is located, the management culture of that company, the salary, which of course is one of the important, as I mentioned, never be swayed by salary alone. salary that gives you, the prestige associated with that company, the kind of job security it offers you, and the nature of the work itself. Now, suppose these are 7 criteria, this particular person, and his three job offers available to him, and he wants to. Now, the relative importance he assigns to this, the importance to particular criteria is quite unimportant, you give weight 1. If it's somewhat unimportant, you give weight 2. Average importance, you give weight 3. Somewhat important, you give weight 4. And if a particular criterion is very important, you give weight 5. Now, therefore, this particular person assigns this kind of weight. As I mentioned, it depends upon you as a decision maker. For example, this particular person who has to make a choice out of these 3 alternative job offers, career advancement is very important, gives a weight of 5. Location is average importance, gives 3. The management culture is somewhat important, gives 4. Salary is average importance, gives 3. For those of people who are only package driven, it's a message for them. Salary has an importance, but average importance, 3. Prestige is somewhat unimportant. Job security is somewhat very important. And enjoyable work is very, very important. So this is the kind of a weight structure that this particular person gives you. Then the degree of satisfaction. If your degree of satisfaction is extremely low, you give a rating scale of 1. And if extremely high satisfaction, you give a 9. And now let's see how the metrics comes in. In these 3 alternative job options, analyst city A, accountant city B, auditor city C, how well these criterion, for example, the career advancement gets a score of 8 in job a score of 6 in job B, and score of 4 in job C. And like this, location, best location is 8, so location B is nearest to his house. Location A gets 3, B gets 8, C gets 7. And like this, it gets salary 675, job security, like this it gets you. Then what you do, simple additive weightage. For example, for job alternative 1, the weight to the various criterion is 5, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. These are the alternate, the relative importance you assign to these criterion. And how city 1 job A fulfills these criterion on a rating scale. And therefore, weight multiplied by the rating gives you a total score. So the total multi-criterion score of alternative A 157, and you get it for second job offer 167, third job offer is 149, and out of using the SAW, a single of simple weighted average weighting. Obviously, the highest score would be job 2, which means that based on all the 7 factors, all the 7 criterion to the extent they're important, out of these 3 job options available to this person, the second job is a preferred option. 167 gets a preferred job. And of course, the third one is the least preferred. And the second option is 157, which is of course a failure. So that's how you use decision matrix or simple additive weighting technique. This is the simplest of the method available. And in my opinion, many problems, because of its simplicity and fairly easy to appeal intuitively, even any person with an elementary appreciation with the common sense would be able to appreciate this technique. And so far as I'm concerned, application of this decision matrix as one of the simple technique, which we have been using, as I mentioned, that this is one technique that I've been using for nearly 40, 50 years. Wherever, for example, in my faculty performance appraisal system that I introduced in IIT Roorkee, faculty performance appraisal is another multi-criterion evaluation. And even my current university, we have introduced a performance appraisal system. Similarly, when we were evaluating the best teacher award of the Vishwesabhai Best Technical Teacher Award in AICT, where I was the chairman, we made use of technique of this nature, simple decision metrics out of the various candidates evaluated on the various criterion for choosing for the award and the importance given. Therefore, this is one of the most simple and yet very powerful. There are no major, it's not a big deal. Everybody can understand this. This takes care, and that's why I've given this as the first choice. For example, city A, total evaluation 157, B, and you get that. Now, I come to the second technique. which is one of the most talked about, one of the most popular, and many researchers still use AHP as a technique for, this was developed by, it's a refinement of a very major refinement of the paired comparison approach that I had talked about earlier, which indeed talks of what it does. Because what I suggest is that since with the varied background and very limited time frame available, out of which some time was lost in the connecting and reconnecting, let me now give an example. And through this example, so here in the analytic hierarchy process, AHP, you first develop a decision-making hierarchy. That means what is your objective topmost hierarchy? Is to pick up the best alternative out of the options available on a multi-criterion basis, your topmost hierarchy goal. Number two, you identify the criterion. And number three, you identify the alternatives. And therefore list the number of alternatives available, list the number of decision criterion available, and then for each criterion, perform steps 2 to 5. It's called develop a pairwise comparison matrix. I'll go into details about that, preferably by taking an example so that you can understand it rather than in a conceptual sense here. But then to just go through it, Sati uses, as I mentioned, 3 steps. In my first slide, only says less important, medium importance, major importance, 1, 2, 3. Sati uses 9-point scale. What it says, compared to the second alternative, if the first alternative is extremely preferred, now mind it's very, once you understand this, it's so simple. Compared to the second alternative in paired comparison, the first alternative is extremely preferred, you give numerical rating of 9. If it's very strongly preferred, you give 7. If it's strongly preferred, you give 5. If it's moderately preferred, you give 3. And if it's equally preferred, you give 1. And therefore, a relative importance is numerically from 1 to 9. And then you develop a pair comparison. Intermediate numeric ratings of 8, 6, 4, 2 can also be given if somewhere in between. And reciprocal rating, here it's important. Reciprocal rating is given when second alternative is preferred to first one, then you give reciprocal rating, which will become. And if you give 1, that means all the diagonal elements in the pair matrix are. Step 3 is to develop a normalized score. Develop a priority vector for each alternative, and then check up for the consistency. This feature was not there in the earlier technique and so on. Consistency check is to see whether when you're giving these weightages and importances, are you consistent in doing so? This checks for consistency of your paired comparison matrix. And if this consistency ratio is less than 0.1, that means less than 10%, you go ahead. Otherwise, you have to revisit your problem formulation. There's something wrong here. Then you do it for relative importance, then develop a decision matrix and pick up. Now, there are steps involved in choosing the consistency. As I said, that I'm not going into details for this. Is for those. Now, let me give an example of this. As I gave the example of first one of choosing a career, here you choose an example of choosing a vendor. Suppose you're a company, you're an entrepreneur, and you have designed a special, signature toothbrush, and looking for a manufacturer who can do this. Therefore, your overall goal is to pick up a best toothbrush manufacturer of your signature toothbrush. Multi-criterion is while choosing a vendor selection should never be a single criterion. For example, one is the cost, second is the product reliability, and third is the delivery time. So the 3 criterion are cost, reliability, and delivery time. And he's identified 3 vendors. You give them whatever you can give name or just, fictitious names, Cornell Industries, Brush, Picobuy. So out of these 3 alternative vendors, against these 3 criterion, cost, reliability, and delivery time, your goal is to pick up the best possible toothbrush manufacturing vendor, which will meet your criterion to the extent they're important, and pick up the, so how to choose a vendor? This could apply. Now you can, you give this example can be applied to choosing a car, choosing a college, choosing a job. Everything can be done. It's just an example they give you, since I had readily available this example. So what you do here, they found that here the cost of, for example, cost, Cornell gives you, let's say 100 rupees a unit, Breastpick charges you 80 rupees a unit, and third vendor charges you 144 rupees a unit. So based on cost, you can develop a paired comparison matrix. For example, since Cornell charges 100 rupees, this is the crux. You can, for cost alone, develop a paired comparison matrix. For example, these are three vendors, vendor ABC or Cornell, Breastpick or whatever. How do they compare on the cost alone? All the diagonal elements of one each. Now, since Cornell charges 100 rupees a unit and Breastpick charges 80 rupees a unit, and Pick and Buy charges 144 rupees a unit. So I'll say second alternative. Like once you understand this, one simple thing, the rest is routine. Just have to, for example, compared to Cornell with Cornell is one, equally important. Since Cornell charges 100 rupees, Breastpick 80, therefore Cornell is less preferred to Breastpick. So it's 1/3. Breastpick is moderately preferred to Cornell. So Breastpick to Cornell is 3. But then Cornell is 100 and Pick and Buy is 144. So you'll see Cornell is strongly preferred to Pick and Buy on cost because it gives a cost advantage. So it gives 6. So first row is 1/3, 6. Second row is 3, 1, 7. And Pick and Buy 1, 6. So reciprocal, if I'm giving Cornell and Pick by 6, then Pick and Buy Cornell will be 1/6. So you just keep in mind, you have to really give only all diagonal elements of 1. Now, once you give this paired comparison matrix, this is with respect to cost. Same thing you'll do with respect to quality. Same thing you'll do with respect to delivery schedule. Now, the moment you have this paired comparison matrix, and this is your input as a decision maker. So next step is normalize this factor, divide the total score. Suppose you add up all the column 1 plus 3 by 1/6, divide that. So what you get here is a normalized score. That means it tells you how these three alternatives compare against a single criterion, that's cost. So cost by cost, actually what you're doing, you're comparing various criteria on individual factor by factor, cost, quality, delivery time. So this is normalized score that you get. Then find out the average value. It's called the priority vector. You add up, for example, 6/25 plus 7/31 plus 6/14, you average out. The first is 0.298. This is called the priority vector, which means that in order to understand that all these are inputs going to your decision matrix. It tells you that if cost was the sole criterion, that's how these three vendors would look at. The first vendor out of, that means the total would add up to 1. The first vendor on cost front is 0.298 because he charges 100 rupees a unit. Second vendor charges you 80 rupees a unit. So it's normalized priority on cost alone is 0.632. Pick and Buy charges you 140 rupees, 44 rupees. So it's not a very good cost advantage. And therefore what it tells you, priority vector on cost, 0.298, 0.632, 0.069. It's a relative importance. The same thing that you saw in that paired comparison. So it tells you if cost was the sole criterion, you'd give the job to Breastpick because his priority vector is 0.632 because he charges 80 rupees, Cornell charges 100 rupees, and Pick by 140. So if cost was the sole factor, so this is called priority vector based on cost alone. But then this is not a single criterion. The second criterion is delivery, is the reliability or quality. Same thing you fill up. This is how you check consistency. I give an overview so that those of you who want to learn more about it, you go through the consistency check, and the consistency ratio is 0.088, which is less than 0.1. Hence, this is okay. Then you go for the second criterion, reliability or quality. Based on the inputs that you get, Suppose this is your paired comparison matrix for, this is how three vendors compare on quality. Which means that Cornell gives you a far better quality than a breast pick, you give 7. Pick and buy, again low. So Cornell, is very strongly preferred to breast pick, weakly preferred to pick and buy, and so on and so forth. Fill in. Once you have that, you can follow the same thing. If you follow one matrix the same way, normalize it by adding all the columns divided by them. So this is a normalized vector. Then this is the priority vector for reliability. That means this tells you how do these three alternative vendors compare on the quality front. First comparison of the cost. And these could be relative. The beauty of multi-criterion optimization is that they could be conflicting objectives. For example, quality and cost may be conflicting, but this can reconcile. For example, what it tells you, vendor 1 on quality front is a 0.571, vendor 2 is 0.278, vendor 3 is 1.151. This is the priority vector against second criterion, that's reliability. Similarly, do for the third factor, that's delivery schedule. So this is a comparison matrix for the delivery schedule. Again, follow the same thing, which means that you go follow that, normalize the schedule, then the average, and therefore the third, based on the third criterion, a delivery schedule, vendor 1 is 0.471, vendor 2 is 0.059, vendor 3 is 0.471, which means that on delivery schedule point of view, the second vendor, who is the cheapest vendor, but is poorest on delivery schedule. Therefore, that's what you are seeing here. But this is how the three vendors on. That means these priority vectors will say, on cost, how do they compare? On quality, how do they compare? And on delivery schedule, how do the three compare? Then comes same thing you do. How do these three criterion compare? For example, cost, reliability, and delivery schedule. Now, this is very important point I wish to make. Of course, this example should also I've chosen it because it was available readily to me to describe, and is relatively simple to comprehend. Now, how important is cost compared to quality compared to delivery schedule? This data was obtained from the cost accounting of the department. And obviously, understandably, the accounting department has given highest priority to cost, followed by reliability, followed by delivery schedule. And obviously, we are given such a high priority to cost compared to delivery schedule. What it means from this, it says the cost is extremely preferred compared to delivery schedule and very strongly preferred compared to quality, which means that this particular decision situation is giving highest weightage to cost, the cheapest value. Many times we get sweet. May not be very sensible thing to do, but since it's an example, and that's what you would see also, the outcome. The moment you give highest priority to cost, the cheapest vendor may not be very highly reliable on delivery schedule, might become preferred. So finally, there is nothing absolutely optimum in multi-criterion. It depends upon the importance you assign to various priorities, and by giving unreasonable weightage to criterion, you can justify whatever decision you want to make. That's the flip side of the MCDM, that by manipulating the priority that you give, you can make any decision as optimal and yet show that you are scientific. And therefore, you have to choose these priorities very carefully. In this case, unfortunately, cost was given a most dominant priority. The impact would be seen. Obviously, the cheapest vendor might emerge. But then, same thing you do it for. How do you compare relative importance of cost, reliability, and delivery schedule? If this is my paired comparison matrix, compare up and you develop, which means that the relative importance to these three criteria 0.729 to cost. That means 72.9% weightage you are giving to the cost alone, which is the most dominant weightage. Reliability or quality, you are giving 21.6% weightage. And delivery schedule, you are giving only 5.5% weightage. But this is what the decision maker has done. Obviously, in my personal view, it's not a great importance to be assigned. Give topmost cost and very low importance to delivery schedule. But then this is how the example gives you. I made my observations on it. Now, therefore, what is now important? This is the final matrix. And this is what finally you convert into decision matrix that I talked about, almost like the simple additive weightage, except that weights have now been obtained. Now, for example, for the cost, reliability, and delivery schedule, the relative weightage is 0.729 for cost, 0.216 for reliability, 0.055 for delivery schedule. It must add up to 1. And you already seen that the priority vector cost-wise, your first vendor gives you 0.298, second vendor 0.632. You are only bringing all those calculations that you've done it and this the final matrix. And so first vendor on cost gives you 0.298. Second vendor on cost 0.632 because he charges 80 rupees a unit. Third one 0.069 because he charges 140 rupees a unit. Reliability 0.571, 0.278, 0.151, and delivery schedule 0.471, 0.059. Now, therefore, now we are ready for the final choice. So, therefore, now the problem has been now reduced to a simple decision matrix, which I used in the phase 1. Now, find out the total weighted score of each criteria, each alternative against each criteria, multiple criteria. So, the total weighted score saw simple additive weightage of first vendor 0.298, which is the importance and cost, multiplied by importance you give to cost 0.729, plus 0.571 is quality multiplied by the importance you give to reliability 0.216, plus is delivery schedule 0.471 multiplied by the importance you give. So total weighted score of alternative 1, Cordell, against the 3 criterion to the extent they're important, it gives you similarly for breast peak and similarly for picobuy, and that's what you get. The total weighted score of first vendor, the importance to cost multiplied by the same as sigma WJ. It started with the and out of this, obviously the highest score is breast peak, which means and since I've given maximum weightage to cost, second vendor gives you the maximum cost advantage. That's why the decision went in favor of a second vendor, although his quality and delivery schedule were not the best. And that's why the major point I wish to tell you, now this is what HP is. Since this example I have demonstrated from here, now you use any constraint, academic, non-academic, personal. Suppose you have job offers to give, you have to decide where to set up your company, where to buy your house. All these are multi-criterion, which car to choose. All these are single multi-criterion, you can use AHP. Now the AHP is one of the most powerful and most popular technique even till date, and many of our management science research makes use of AHP. The limitation of AHP has been that it considers that these simple, these goals are mutually exclusive. That means cost, quality, and delivery schedule do not impact each other, which may not be necessarily true. And therefore, the limitation of AHP is that the interaction amongst the goals is ignored here. You are assuming that these goals are mutually exclusive. Cost, quality, and delivery schedule are mutually exclusive, which may not be true. And this indeed is a major limitation of AHP. For that, there has been a further enrichment of this technique. I'm only simply giving the name to those who may be interested in following it up for the research. It's called ANP, Analytic Network Process, where it is assumed that all these objectives affect each other. Cost affects quality, quality affects delivery schedule affects cost. And therefore, if all these factors are mutually interdependent, which AHP ignores, then the technique to be used is called ANP, Analytic Network Process. And the process is similar to HP, but slightly more elaborate. And therefore, with this is one of the, and therefore I have discussed with you very powerful technique, simple additive weighting. And the AHP, one of the most dominant and one of the most popular techniques. In fact, I must tell you that AHP, Thomas Sarti, became so celebrity by developing this technique in 1980. But of those of you who might be interested in the study of operations research, he wrote a very major thick book in 1966 called Elements of Queuing Theory, linear programming queuing theory, or the classical techniques of operation research. But he's not known for his contribution to queuing theory because queuing theory is so mathematical and single criterion optimization compared to, and there was, since most problems of significance are multi-criterion in nature, Sarti is more known for his contribution to AHP rather than his contribution to theory of queues or waiting line models. And I had an opportunity to meet him in Bangkok when I'd invited him to a keynote speaker in an international conference on multi-criterion decision making in 1990, where I was chairman and the division chairman. Now we come to the second important, and this again, I find it again a reasonably sensible basis. Again, like AHP, I'll give you the mathematical, methods will be given in the PPT. You can, but then the spirit behind it, the focus behind it is what is important here. It's called TOPSIS. It's an acronym. TOPSIS is a technique of order preference by similarity to ideal solution. Now, a technique of order preference by similarity to ideal solution. So what you find, that there is an ideal solution to a multi-criterion decision making. You know, what's an ideal solution? An ideal solution which you get the best of best. And suppose you look for a car, or look for a college, or look for a job, where you get every factor to the best of your advantage. Suppose you go buy for a car which is cheapest in cost, gives you the maximum mileage, is the most attractive, has the largest resale value, so you get the best of the best. Or you look for a college which charges the minimum fees, gives you the highest placement package, is closest to your house, is most famous for its faculty quality, and is very transparent and exciting work culture. So you get best of everything. Obviously, it's only wishful thinking. This is called an ideal solution. An ideal solution is where all your criterion are met to the fullest extent. But this is only a concept. It's a beautiful concept. That an ideal solution would have been which was best on every count. You get the best of everything. But as I mentioned, in multi-criterion optimization, unfortunately, there is a conflict of objectives. If a college is good, it may charge you more fees. If a college charges less fees, it may not be so good in quality because it may not attract the best faculty, and so on and so forth, or best facilities. Therefore, in general, there is a conflict of interest or conflict of these goals and criterion. These are known as incommensurable objectives, or incompatible objectives. If you improve one, the other one will be eroded, and so forth. So in life, there is nothing like a perfect ideal solution because of the conflict of these objectives. So what this technique TOPSIS does, it identifies a fictitious, a conceptual ideal solution. What would have been an ideal option where you get everything best possible. Then it says you pick up that objective as a that alternative as the best alternative, which is closest to the ideal solution. It makes sense. So what it says, a preferred solution out of the options that finite discrete option that you have, a preferred option is the one which is nearest to the ideal solution and farthest to the negative ideal. It actually brings out two. Ideal solution is you get the best of everything, and the negative ideal is you get the worst of everything. Is the antithesis of ideal. So what it says, the TOPSIS tries to find out that alternative out of various options available to you, which is closest to the ideal and farthest from the negative ideal. That means what's possible. So it identifies two benchmarks, the best ideal and the worst, possible negative ideal. And based on that, the beauty of this technique is like AHP, it can use qualitative criterion like benefits. It can be profit, it can be attributes. It can use quantitative criterion like profit and cost, and it can use profit and cost criterion. So both positive attributes like profit or negative attributes like cost. Now, therefore, as I said, these are ideal solution, an ideal alternative. To artificial alternative, because in real life you would be not lucky that you get best of everything. Maybe one of the rarest that you get best of everything. An ideal solution is one which is the best of every attribute is best possible. And a negative ideal is where everything is worst possible. Now, these are two extreme benchmarks. Topsy selects an alternative which is closest to the ideal and farthest from the negative ideal. Makes sense. This why I'm only talking those techniques which are relatively easy to understand by common sense. And if it makes great sense to choose an alternative which is closest to the ideal solution, a perfect solution, and farthest from the worst possible solution. And based on that, it develops, suppose take M alternatives and N attributes, N criteria. So you have N into M matrix, and if Xij is the score of option I with respect to criterion. Now, the steps involved. You first construct a normalized decision matrix. This transforms the various attributes into non-dimensional attributes. This normalization is a very common goal. The normalized efficiency score is the actual score divided by sigma Xij square. Here you do away with the problems of dimensions. Then second step is construct a weighted normalized matrix by multiplying the weight and the normalized score, Vij. Again, I'll give an example. Step 3 is determine the ideal and negative ideal. An ideal solution is where you get all those attributes which are a positive ones, you get the maximum score, and all those things where negative, you get the minimum score. An ideal solution is which you get the best of everything. You call them, let's say, we just start an ideal solution. Best of best. Negative ideal is worst of worst on everything. And then find out the separation distance, a Euclidean distance. How a particular alternative that you want to evaluate, how far or how close it is to the ideal solution and how far it is to the negative ideal solution. It's a simple, that's how we compute a Euclidean distance from 2 points, simple straight line differences. Then the final weightage that you give, the final CI star, the best choice is SI dash is the negative ideal, the distance of negative ideal solution, and SI star is the distance from the ideal solution. They pick up the closest to this. Now, this is how as I give you, again, I'll demonstrate with an example. I take an example. Here you want to choose a car. Let's say I'm choosing examples which are really easy. And third example, I'll give when I choose a faculty selection using VCOR. 3 different examples relevant to maybe even in your institution, you may be choosing and which car to buy. Suppose you have 4 options available to you: Civic, Saturn, Ford, and Mazda. All these are examples from the foreign context. In any case, we do have foreign cars in this country too. Suppose they have given 4 criterion: the style, that means how its appearance, how beautiful it looks you. The reliability, that means quality and reliability. Reliability is the probability that it performs its intended function for a given period. 10% weightage to style, 40% weightage to reliability, 30% weightage to fuel economy, how much mileage it gives you, and the fourth is weightage to cost. Therefore, you can see that only 20% weightage is given to cost here, as opposed to 72% cost weightage given to the previous example. Here it sounds logical: 10% to style, 40% to the quality and reliability, 30% to fuel economy, and 20% weightage to the initial purchase cost. And based on that, suppose the score that you got, this is the basic score matrix that you get, that these alternatives, Civic 7 on a 9-point scale, 7 weightage to on style, 9 weightage to reliability, 9 weightage to fuel economy, Ford gives you 9 on, and so on and so forth. So this is a starting matrix from which we apply top. Relatively simple, much simpler than AHP. Now, for example, what your second step is, if Xij is given here in this matrix and Wj, the weightage is given there, Vij here. Notation may be slightly different because the source of example is from a different source here. I started the source towards the end of this PPT. Now, this is the matrix which this is the process normalization. Civic on style was 7, so square is 49. Civic on reliability was 9, so square is 81. On cost was 8, so square is, so it's square of the weightage Xij. Then add up all the squares and take the square root. The normalized, so 15.17 is the square root of the sigma square of first column. Then in order to convert a normalized score, divide the original score, because you know these are divided by the by sigma 50. So for 7 divided by 15.17, 81 9 divided by what you get is, this is a normalized score. That means I have now converted the entire weightages into a dimensionless normalized score. Once you have the normalized score against 4 criteria, 4 alternative, 4 criterion, now multiply by the weightage. Weightage was given, as you know, that 0.1 multiplied by 0.46, 0.046. Weightage multiplied by the normalized score is this matrix that you get. So this is what it says. This is how the 4 alternative choices would rate against 4 criteria, given their importance. Now find out. Now you can see style, reliability, and fuel economy are positive attributes. More the merrier. Cost is a negative attribute, less the merrier. Therefore, you divide them now into, this is a division. First 3 attributes or first 3 criterion, more the merrier. So pick up, I'm now trying to find out the ideal solution. Look for imagine an ideal car, which will be giving you reliability of a Civic, fuel economy of a Civic, style of the Ford, and the cost of Mazda. Mazda is the lowest cost. So therefore, what you're doing here, you're wishful thinking that look for an imaginary artificial best of best, where a car which gives you reliability of Civic, fuel economy of Civic, style of Ford, but the cost of Mazda. You call it as a 0.059, 0.244, 0.162, 0.080. Now, these are the 4 attributes of an ideal solution. I call it, let's say, A star. Similarly, find out, then determine the separation index. For example, then you find out, once you know the ideal separation indexes, for example, the first is 0.046 and 0.059 is the ideal. The difference multiplied squares. That's how we compute the Euclidean distance. Separation distance is now computed for each row. So you find out here how much is the ith alternative away from the ideal solution. And this is how you find out. For example, Civic is the distance from ideal solution 0.029. Saturn is 0.057. Ford is 0.09, which means farthest is Ford and nearest is Civic from the ideal solution. Similarly, find out the negative ideal. To find out the negative ideal, you can again look at that. For example, negative ideal would be, it is the antithesis. For example, a car which indeed is gives you the cost of Ford 0.018. All the white things here are. So look at a car which is the fuel economy of Saturn, which is the worst, and of Ford, which is worst, Mazda, which is the worst, but the price of Ford. And therefore, as a result, if you work it out, this is a negative ideal. Again, compute the distance of negative ideal. like this. So therefore, the separation distance from the negative ideal would be civic is the farthest from the negative ideal, and Ford is closest to the negative ideal. Now you can look at that. Some of you should be able to guess the answer. Ford is farthest from the ideal and nearest to the negative ideal. That means सबसे खराब जो alternative होगा Ford option होगा इसमें. और ये एक बार, in fact, if you, some of those who know, Ford in the mid-80s was almost on the brink of getting into the red zone because of tough competition from Japanese cars. And that's why the quality function deployment, a very powerful technique in TQM that we use. Ford used quality function deployment as a powerful technique of customer orientation and transformed into a performing. So therefore, this is a negative, distance from negative ideal solution. Then you find out the final choice is pick up an option which is given by this ratio, distance from negative ideal divided by distance from the negative ideal as well as positive ideal. And obviously, since negative ideal is on the numerator, largest value, which means that out of this ratio, I'll say out of these 4 cars, the Civic, the first option, which gives you the highest score, which means closest to the ideal, and farthest from negative ideal gives a score of 0.74. The worst is Ford, 0.17, followed by Mazda 0.45, followed by Saturn. So the various alternatives can be prioritized based on multi-criterion. Obviously, the best. Now, one thing is very insightful here. Ford Civic, though, is the best out of these options, but their distance from the ratio of ideal to negative ideal is 0.74, which means that it is not the perfect answer. The perfect would have been 1, but it's not there. The perfect will never be there, but it tells you how away from perfect you are. 0.74 is 74% of the ideal choice. Now, third thing, a technique that I talked about is here. I'll take an example of selecting a faculty. Now, third technique is VICOR. VICOR, as I mentioned, is difficult to pronounce name of Serbia, but it means that you make a compromise solution. See, all multi-criterion decision making are basically compromise solutions. You have to compromise over something. So all criterion, that's why there's nothing like optimization and multi-criterion decision making. Although we do use the term, but multi-criterion optimization is a compromised optimization where there's a trade-off involved amongst various criterion. And one such VICOR model, which indeed has been developed here, in fact, I come to this. Suppose you are choosing, a college wants to choose a faculty member. Again, I have taken this from a published example. I've given source of that. May not be the best example, but since I wanted to save my computational time to give this example, I've chosen for me. Suppose you're looking for a faculty, and these are 7 candidates who have applied for you, and their criterion, that selection criterion you have chosen is you're not going for the lowest quotation. It means the person who charges the least amount. Otherwise, you would have gone for candidate number 6, who is a simple BTech, charges you 25,000 rupees a month, and that's it. Therefore, suppose you have chosen to go in for various multi-criterion for faculty selection, where qualifications, experience, salary expectations per month, ability to handle different subjects. That means particularly in the area of multidisciplinarity and the new education policy, person's capacity to be versatile in handling more than one course is a desirable attribute. Research activities, number of papers published, technical skills, and presentation and communication skill. As you know, in faculty selection, which I mentioned in my initial lecture, that somebody may be very exceptionally brilliant in academic percentage marks, but may not be the best person available for chosen, because communication skills, technical skills, and other things, and higher education and research counts. Therefore, Faculty selection ought to be a multi-criterion decision making. Faculty promotion ought to be a multi-criterion decision making. As we said, faculty appraisal must be a multi-criterion decision making. And I'm using it in all. I started it in IT Roorkee. Faculty performance appraisal using the decision metrics here. I'm using simple, but VCORE is a more advanced method here. And I must tell you that VCORE primarily is a combination of AHP and TOPSIS. It borrows some part from TOPSIS and some part from AHP. Let me now give an example here, and I'll in fact, it's slightly more cumbersome than the two techniques I talked about, and that's why I'll not go into the details. Those interested, and to my mind, I'm not greatly enthused by this technique, VCORE model, but since I wanted to give you some example from academic context. So suppose this 7 people. Candidate 1 is pursuing PhD, second one is MTech, third is pursuing PhD, fourth is MTech, fifth is pursuing PhD, sixth is BTech, and seventh is a PhD. Their experience in years is first candidate has 12 years, 10 years, 5 years, 1 year, 10 years, 1 year, 10 years. The salary expectations are 80,000, 60,000, 50,000, 40,000, 70,000, 25,000, 1,30,000. PhD, the moment you get a PhD, your expectations score very high. And this I'm seeing almost in every selection. Ability to handle different subjects, 5, 5, 8, 1, 3, 1, 6. Research papers published 3, 8, 8, 3, 1, 1, 4. Technical skills, average, above average, below average, excellent, poor, good. Presentation or communication skills, average, average, poor, average, above average, below average. And now let's look at the last candidates. Very interesting examples created. Last candidate is PhD, charges you huge amount of money, good in technicals, but below average in communication skill. Obviously, in a multi-criterion context, he may not get selected, as perhaps would be the case here. And therefore, as a result, this becomes a multi-criterion decision-making problem. Whom to hire out of these 7 candidates that you have? So what you do in VCORE, you give rating, for example, for various qualifications, technical skills, communication skills. Now these are non-measurable parameters. Others were measurable parameters like 12 years experience, 80,000 salary, subjects to handle, 3 research papers. These are measurable or quantifiable, but these are non-quantifiable qualifications, technical skills, communication skills. So in order to use this technique, you develop a benchmark. For example, if somebody is BTech, or if the technical skills are poor, communication skills are poor, you give 5. If somebody is MTech or below average in technical skills or below average in communication skills, you give 6. Somebody is MTech plus some other qualifications, average, technical average is give 7. PhD pursuing is above average, or technical skills are above average or communication skills are above average, give 8. If somebody is PhD, good, or technical skills are good, communication skills good, you 9. And anybody having postdoctoral qualifications is excellent. Technical skills are excellent, communications are excellent, you give 10. So what you're doing, you're developing a benchmark, because these criterion can be evaluated only a rating scale like poor, below average, average, above average, good. Others were numbered, 12 years, 80,000, 3 papers. The multi-criterion technique, decision-making, synthesizes both quantifiable and qualitative parameters in a complete sense. For that, you develop a rating for different criterion. So what you do here, so what we have done here, person pursuing, so you convert all these numbers and these scores. I'm just jumping through. With this, this is how you develop a normalized score for final selection. Normalized metrics, for example, these candidates A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Qualification marks based on the numbers. This is how we get. The last one being a PhD gets a score of 1. Others get a fractional score. The BTech gets 0.5556. Experience, the first one having 12 years experience get a score of 1. Others are proportionately different. Salary expectation, the last one, the sixth one who is a beta gets 25,000 rupees, is a score of 1. The last one gets 0.186 because he is charging much more. Others are in between. Ability to handle different subjects. Third one can handle more subjects, gets 1. So 1 is the best alternative and the worst alternative. So this is called a normalized. So first thing common in all the techniques I've talked about is that because the efficiency score may be in different numbers, some are qualitative, some are quantitative, you normalize them, then only you can add them. You can't add the oranges and bananas, and therefore a normalization helps you to convert a common scale, which is a unit less, and therefore, suppose this is a normalized score. So what VCOR does, I'm only giving an overview. I'm not going to the details. Very, very, very cumbersome for you to understand that. Even for me, it was cumbersome. So what you do, and then later on I'll tell you how simple technique है. ये मैंने ऐड करा इसमें, थोड़ी सी calculation कल करी मैंने इसमें उस पेपर से अलग करके. So what VCOR does, it identifies 3 criterion and ranks these alternatives on each one of them. First one is it calls EI. EI is the efficiency score of the ith alternative against the group utility of that option. How useful that alternative is for the group, and the ranking is done. Second one is the regret, the individual regret. Obviously, if a person doesn't get selected, there's an individual regret involved. So how do you rank these against individual regrets? Which means it's almost like the ideal and non-negative ideal. That means that all these techniques or numbers or dozens are coming primarily hover around the basic fundamental issue that I've talked about. Only they're calling different names, but essentially they hover around these areas. That's why I've chosen those 3 very preferable techniques. And of course, goal programming is a subject by itself differently, which I have not touched other than giving you. So what it does, based on the ranking on these, the third ranking is a compromise. That's why we call it so multi-criterion optimization of a compromise solution. So it tries to compromise between ideal and negative ideal, and the weightage, the factor importance is based on the AHP. Like a consistency check is made like AHP, and therefore based on that, what it does, it gives absolute weightage to these factors he is given. These weightages are given almost like AHP. For example, qualifications 30% weightage. Experience 28.73, at third one 12% salary, attributes, and so on and so forth. Presentation 0.50. I'm only giving an example. I'm not supporting this example because to me, if somebody only gives 5% weightage to communication skill to a teacher and 5% weightage to technical skill, what kind of teacher we would get is up to you to decide. Anyway, I'm only giving an example directly available from the literature, but we ought to give these weightage. So suppose these are the weights given. Now what VCOR does, it tries to rank these alternatives based on criterion P1, which is a compromise criterion. It's a compromise between the general utility, that means closer to the ideal, to the negative ideal, to the individual regret for making a wrong choice. So out of these teachers, 7 candidates, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, based on the compromise solutions, they will go for A, E, G, C, B, D, E. And based on AI, and therefore from here, obviously candidate A would be a preferred candidate on these 7 attributes. And of course, that means if I get back to that candidate, a candidate out of these 7 who is pursuing PhD and has 12 years experience, is looking for a salary expectation of 80,000 per month as an assistant professor, has the ability to handle different subjects, 5 different subjects, and the research activity has 3 research papers published, has an average technical skills and an average communication skills, is a preferred choice. Sounds good out of the options available. And therefore, a candidate who is a PhD, 7th candidate G, 10 years experience, if you look at where he stands here in the because in fact, Bicor ranking goes to 3. And therefore, as a result, the preferred choice is here. Now, what point I wish to make here, this is an example I did. We don't have to be unnecessarily more complex than we need to. When I got this example from Bicor, I wanted to know what would have been the option, preferred option, if I had used simple additive weightage technique that I talked about here. So what you need to do, this is a normalized score multiplied by the weight here. So the weights are given, WJ multiplied that. So I just you can see here, since there was not much space left, I put in the candidates. What you see in the bracket after in candidate A, 0.7779 is the weighted score that I worked out in this example using the simple additive decision matrix, simple technique that I started in the first, like job selection. Second candidate 0.6477, and like this we get, and therefore as a result, even if I had used not Bicor, but a simple additive weighting technique, a simple decision matrix, I would have preferred candidate A, 0.7779, followed by the second candidate, G, and like this, followed by the candidate number 5.67, followed by candidate number 2, and the least preferred candidate is G, is 6. F is simply a BTEC, although it's the cheapest candidate available to you. Therefore, that's how you can use. Now, these are the references from where I have taken this example on my input from various sources. Then the AHP and so I have chosen career option from this book. Sanjay, this is a beautiful book. In fact, that's my reference book in teaching decision science. I teach these subjects in my decision science course. I'll be teaching my classes here on 34th. And then I've chosen various Wikipedia and Google. Topsys, for example, is not in this. So Topsys I've chosen from the Google search through Wikipedia. And the list of the various techniques I've chosen from Wikipedia, these techniques that I talked about here. Let me just get back to the original. Yeah. Now these are the various techniques of multi-criterion techniques I talked about. I covered SAW, AHP, Topsys, and a bit of Bicor. Then there are similar Electra. Now, and I must also tell you, this is not a complete list. Now there are fuzzy AHP, ENP, fuzzy AHP. Fuzzy AHP is where you know these are not. The information is not a perfect information. It's fuzzy. That means vague in information, and therefore all these fuzziness has been added into. So there are now dozens and dozens of multi-criterion techniques. People are finding this as a newly available research area, but for the purpose of easy understanding. But to me, SAW is the simplest, simple additive weighting or the decision matrix that I covered here. Even if you use the simple, decision matrix, and that's why I give topmost priority to that single page. Most of the time that you come across multi-criterion decision making, my only advice is that no decision of any real significance be ever taken by single criterion. That means never select a faculty only on the basis of the money that is willing to work for, or only on the basis of qualifications, or only on the basis of experience, or only on the basis of communication skill. All these factors are important, and therefore give relative importance to these factors, and then evaluate similarly while promoting people, while picking the best teacher award, while giving the best researcher award. Multi-criterion approach is a very sensible approach to make balanced decisions. In the process, you do make compromises, but what is critical here is to give relative importance very carefully. If you give relative importance in favor of what you want to do, then you may give a feeling of being scientific, but finally you are justifying what decision you have already made. That's not a very fair proposition. So be very careful to me, the choosing the right priorities is one of the most important decision of a manager. If you can't even prioritize your goals, and therefore it helps you to prioritize your goal, you know what the most important criterion, what the least important criterion, the relative importance you assign to these goals, and then evaluate these alternatives against this multiple criterion. Perhaps the decision you would be making would be a very sensible decision, and particularly if the decision happens to be a strategic choice, a important policy, that you can't change it later on. You will burn your fingers if you go wrong, because a single wrong decision at a strategic domain can finish an organization. And therefore, particularly for critical decisions of significance, of strategic nature, of policy nature, we must invariably go for multi-criterion evaluation of those finite discrete alternatives that you have. Obviously, before you choose these alternatives, some of the preparatory work you can do, some of the less important alternatives can be screened out at the early stage itself. So what is finally left in you are, after the shortlisting, these are serious candidates to be evaluated against these multiple criteria, and then assign the relative importance of these criteria, have a normalized performance score, and then use the decision metrics or SAW or EHP or TOPSIS. They are fairly simple and easy to perform techniques. Others are also there, but to my mind, there are multiple variations of here and there. All of these have been used for their. Vikur was a PhD thesis in 1979, but his first application came in 1994. And therefore, as a result, I thought that since I was given this topic, although I thought this topic might not be of interest to many, but since that was the topic given to me, but I do feel that everyone who is in some role of decision making, even your personal life, for example, where to settle down and which job to pick up, which car to buy, which house to buy, where to send your child for education, which college to go in. All these are multi-criterion decisions, whether in the context of your organization or your personal context. My advice would be important decisions of life must invariably made with multi-criterion dimensions in life, but it's equally important to choose your priorities and the relative importance very carefully. Otherwise, you'll make wrong decisions. Don't blame the MCDM technique for it. The blame is for the data that you feed in, the priorities you give. If you give highest weightage to cost advantage, that in the vendor selection example that I gave, all the examples that I gave, other than the career selection job, perhaps are not a very sensible data set here, but those are the data available to me. Now, giving highest weightage to a cost advantage to choosing a vendor and very low weightage to quality and delivery schedule is not a very sensible priority structure. Similarly, giving least weightage to the communication skill for choosing a teacher is not like in the Vicore example. So what is important takeaway from here? Choose these techniques which are simple to use. Don't go for very fancy technique. Even these 3 techniques I talked about are good enough for most cases. They're easy to use, easy to comprehend, are conceptually very simple. Choosing a career which is closest to the ideal. Ideal would be never there, but choosing something closest to the ideal or farthest from the negative ideal makes common sense. So the 3 major techniques I talked about, TOPSIS, EHP, and SAW, or decision metrics, which is a generic thing, are very usable, and I'm sure they're simple to do. One major category I've left altogether is first category, where you have indefinite number of alternatives. There are resource constraints within which you have to find a solution. Multiple ordinal ranking of goals, priority goals. There the techniques used are goal programming and all its variants. That's a different ball game altogether, and would require anyway your understanding of linear programming, simplex method, and the computerization. But those of you who are interested in looking at that, the group of techniques used are goal programming and its variants, which are only made in a passing reference. And the technique that I have majorly covered here are going to be useful to you in various contexts almost every other day when you make a choice. With this, I'm through with my presentation. I'll perhaps stop sharing and come to here now. If there are any comments and questions to be used, please feel free and consult. I'm here available for you to answer your queries, but I wish to make it very clear. Be very careful in prioritizing your criteria. Sometimes you may give a feeling of being very scientific, but giving over importance to a criterion, which virtually, because ultimately, if you give 100% weightage to single criterion and 0% to others, you may say it's a multi-criterion technique, but with 0% weightage to the rest, it's basically single. So prioritization is critical input. With wrong priorities, because in decision science, if you feed wrong data, you get wrong answers. Don't blame the technique. So be careful about the priorities that you give to various criterion, because depending upon priority structure, so there are no standard answers to MCDM, multi-criteria. Different people would lead different answers depending upon their preferences, which but the critical thing in order to make a good decision is be very careful what priorities do you give to. Don't give highest priority to the cheapest faculty selection. A faculty member who charges the minimum amount of money is a preferred choice. will land you up in bigger problems. Choosing a faculty is a long-term decision. Choosing a career is a long-term decision. Choosing a location of your college is a long-term decision. Choosing a principal for your college is a long-term decision. And therefore, all these decisions, where to send your child for admissions, which university to choose, which job to, all these are multi-criterion decisions belonging to the category I talked about. And perhaps using simple tool that I discussed today, which is doable, usable, perhaps you will be able to make very good choices. But the trick lies here in making the right priorities. Don't mix up with your priority to justify a solution you already made up in your mind. That way you may be misusing MCDM by giving highest priority to something they already made up in your mind. Choose right priority structure. Evaluate options holistically, and I'm sure that you'll be happy with your choice. Thank you. Now, any questions on it? I see Dr. Amik Garg here too. Okay, all right, good.
Thank you, sir, for giving your valuable insight on multi-criteria decision-making techniques. Now the session is open for taking the queries. Participants are requested to write their queries in the chat box. So here we have our first question. So the question is, how do we motivate decision makers not familiar with the values of structured decision making to derive values from its approach for strategic decision making, especially to the top management who are not keen to adapt them?
So, if they are not keen to make and adopt this, then they're not keen to be rational in their decision making. Or maybe they're swayed by their already fixed mind. And if somebody's already decided, see, decision making theory of choice, if they already decided, that means there is no flexibility in your choice. You are not willing for any other answer. The first thing is, if you really want to make a rational, all that I talked about is rational decision making. If you're not open to an idea, that means you are not open to rationality and decision making, and no amount of technique would help you. Even if you give a facade of a technique, by mixing up the priority, you can give highest weightage to a particular factor you want to weigh in. So to me, first and foremost reason for the top management to make a decision is because the real effectiveness of managerial decision, the managers are known by the quality of decisions they make. The managerial effectiveness is the decision-making quality and timeliness. These are two attributes. How good decisions and how timely decisions you make will determine what kind of a manager you are, what kind of company you are working for. And therefore, in order to make good decisions, quality decisions in time, is good to be rational. And rationality is multi-criterion. Now, why I'm saying a strategic domain, because if we look at, that's why I started, strategic decisions are long-term decisions. That means if you make one single mistake, a single wrong decisions can finish you. For example, location. There are many colleges. In my, if your college is locationally advantageous, you're located in a very good place, you continue to benefit by virtue of good location. If you are very badly located, where location of a college is very, very poor, difficult to connect, even your college, because they impact everything. So if you moment realize that strategic decisions are never single criterion decisions, they have multiple dimensions, multiple attributes. The other name is multiple attributes, multiple criterion, multiple objective, multiple MCDM. Therefore, if you make a wrong decision, suppose you go in for locating a college based on a single criterion that 200 acres of land is freely available in that state, and you locate your college there based on a single criterion that free land availability, that's it. Many times we do that. But then every other factor would be against that. So therefore, never make a strategic decision based on a single criterion, however tempting it may be. And if you make wrong decisions at strategic level, you will continue to suffer for all times to come. And therefore, top management who are really wish to be rational in their approach, they must understand that even I give you the example in the academic context, ownership of those colleges who get swayed by a single factor in their mind, they hire the lowest quotation faculty, they locate a college where the cheapest land is available, are perhaps not going to survive in this competitive world. Therefore, first simple message to those people at the top management level to understand that if they wish to remain in business for long, they ought to be very careful in choosing their rational choice of strategic policy decisions. And if you want to make rational choice at policy level or strategic level, they ought to be multi-criterion in nature. If you don't make those decisions based on multiplicity of criterion, you would not be able to hit at the best choice, and perhaps you may not survive in the market. Perhaps that's the way we can try to convince people at that level. That's it.
Okay, so the next question is how to decide which method is more robust?
Indeed, as I mentioned, that it depends upon, for example, for many of like faculty performance appraisal, the first three techniques I have made are reasonably good. TOPSIS, AHP, and SAW or decision matrix are fairly robust. The other one I simply given, in fact, a passing reference. Perhaps the other techniques that they are mentioned here, people are using more in the context of doing research, like Swara model, Demetel, Electra, people are using these models for doing research and publishing papers, because as you know that many times it has become a fashion to use a different technique to get a paper published. Therefore, the large list that I gave you, ENP is slightly more difficult. And therefore, for simple, practical, doable application, the techniques I talked about are the ones which are useful and robust. Simple, easy to understand. The other one are perhaps being not extensively used, but people are using them for research purposes. But I just wanted to give a list. That's it. Okay. Other questions, if any?
Okay, sir, with this, we come to the end of this session. Thank you, sir, for sparing your valuable time and joining with us today.
Thank you very much. All the best. But I
All
wonder
the
why did you choose?
participants are requested to fill the feedback form shared in the chat box. Thank you.